Hi, everyone. I would love you to just put your hands up if you have ever heard of something called imposter syndrome. Has anyone ever heard of imposter syndrome? About half the room. Let me explain to you what imposter syndrome is, okay? So imposter syndrome is defined as a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evident success. So let me say that more in like normal words. It's where you just feel like you're not good enough, even though all evidence points to the contrary. Even though like you're actually achieving what you're meant to achieve, you still don't feel like you're good enough. To give you an example of what that felt like, I felt a lot of imposter syndrome when I was studying at university. So I found that like whenever I was in a classroom or whenever I was talking to my mates who were studying with me, it felt like they knew loads more than I did. It felt like they got everything, like they had the answer to every question, and the whole way through I was like, I just have no idea what these guys are talking about. Absolutely not a clue. But when it came to times to like do the exams and do the assessments, I was consistently getting higher grades than most of everyone else in the class. So the evidence suggests that actually I did get what was going on, that actually I was meant to be there, that I did understand things well, but my feelings inside that persisted throughout my time at university was, everyone knows more than me, I shouldn't be here, I'm constantly waiting for someone to find out that I'm actually a fraud and I'll get kicked out because I don't belong here whatsoever. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to just apply to academia. It can be like a group of friends where like you're with them and they're all really cool and you're like, oh, I don't think I'm as cool as these guys. Maybe they don't really like me. Or maybe it's like a specific environment, like you come to church and you're like, oh, I don't really feel good enough to be here. Everyone else here is just like really on it. I'm kind of like a bad person. The evidence suggests that those things aren't true. Your friends are still hanging out with you. They still want to hang out with you. They probably actually think you're quite funny and cool. The evidence suggests that everyone here is broken and we all deserve to be here. And yet there's something in us sometimes which says you're not good enough, even though we actually are. Does that make sense? So with that said, who here do you think you felt imposter syndrome at some point in your life? Most hands have gone up. That's really helpful. Imposter syndrome isn't a new thing. This isn't like a brand new feeling. I know that maybe I've just described it to some of you for the first time, but it's not brand new. And I'm fairly sure that the followers of Jesus also felt it thousands of years ago. Let's read a bit of the Bible. So I'm reading from Matthew 28, verses 16 to 20. And this is like the last thing that Jesus says to his followers before he goes off to chill in heaven, as you do. He says this. Well, the Bible says this. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. So this is like the bit in the Bible where it's the final interaction between Jesus and his mates. The guys who he spent 3 years hanging out with, teaching, doing miraculous stuff with. And the thing is, this crowd of mates actually wasn't like the most holy people. Like they weren't the biggest believers. When they went to see Jesus, a guy who they literally saw die, they literally saw him die on the cross, and yet he was stood there, alive in front of him, it still says they saw him, worshipped him, but some of them still doubted. Like these are the guys who knew Jesus like literally like face to face, shook his hand, hung out with him, ate dinner with him. And even in this moment of like profound miracle where he is alive when he was dead, even then, some of them are like, I don't know if this is real. I don't know if this is actually happening. I don't know if I'm even meant to be here. I'm kind of imagining the scene now. Like Jesus is hanging out with this group and he's saying to them, right lads, it's your turn. It's your turn. You've seen everything I've done. You've joined in with it. You know everything you need to know. You now need to go out and have a bash at it. Tell people about me. Invite them along to be part of your community. You have got this. You can do this. And I'm just imagining that in this like small group of people, there's like 2 or 3 who are just lost in their own heads. And they're thinking, Jesus, mate, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not even sure you're real right now. I definitely don't feel like I'm up to the task you're putting ahead of me. All these other guys I see around me, they might be able to have a go at it. They might be able to do it. They might be able to tell someone about you. But there's absolutely no way that I'm going to be able to do this. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. I don't have enough faith. I wonder what we feel about the command that we read in that passage, because Jesus isn't just talking to that group, like those handful of guys. He's actually addressing each one of us who say that we know him and that we're his friend and we want to follow him. He's talking to you, and he's talking to me when he says, go, make disciples of all the nations. And that just means go, share people who I am, try and show them how to live like me. I wonder how you feel when you think God is telling you to go and tell your mates about him. Maybe you're feeling excited. Maybe you're feeling nervous. Maybe you have a similar reaction of just massive imposter syndrome, like, fair enough, Jesus, I know you're saying that to me, but I actually don't think I'm brave enough, or I don't think I know enough to be able to do that well, or maybe I've done too many things wrong, and so I'm not actually okay to do that, someone else needs to do it. Maybe you're even looking around the room, you're like, do you know what, I reckon there are some people in this room who would absolutely nail that. Don't think it's me. That's imposter syndrome, right? Because Jesus says it to you. And the thing is that Jesus isn't surprised by those feelings, just like he wasn't surprised by the fact that some of his followers doubted him, even though he'd come back to life and he was stood right in front of them. He isn't surprised by that. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think that Jesus ever experienced imposter syndrome. I'm fairly sure he was quite certain of who he was and what he was meant to be doing. But when we read the Bible, and in fact, when we look through all of church history, we can see that every single time God says to someone, I have something for you to do that's going to be of some significance, 100% of the time, people respond with, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do that. I don't think I've got what it takes. 100% of the time. And so if Jesus is relying on, like, by this point, thousands of years of human experience, like, he is God, he knows what's happened, like, he chats to his Father, he knows what's gone on, he knows how people respond when they're given, like, a task that feels quite big. He knows that's going to happen. And so right at the end of this passage, in the last verse, he says something to help us get through, like, this imposter syndrome, this feeling of not being good enough. He says, surely I will be with you to the very end of the age. Surely I will be with you to the very end of the age. Suddenly, how we feel about the task ahead of us and how those disciples felt about the task that Jesus set them doesn't really matter anymore. That actually maybe feels quite controversial to say, your feelings don't matter. But let me put it like this, right? Let's say that you've got a really hard science test at school this week, right? And actually thinking about it now, you're like, I absolutely do not feel prepared for this test. Like, I've missed half of the lessons because of, like, COVID and stuff like that. I, don't really like science very much. I haven't got time to revise. I think I'm just going to fail it. But then your teacher comes up to you and is like, don't worry. You can take Albert Einstein with you into the exam, and he can sit next to you and he can tell you all the answers. Suddenly, the fact that you're a bit nervous about it and you don't know very much doesn't really matter about how you're going to perform on the test, does it? Like, you've got Albert Einstein next to you, and he's like, don't worry, bro. I wrote this equation. Let me take this, right? That's literally what it's like. That's literally what Jesus is saying to his disciples. He's like, it's okay if you don't feel brave enough because I am courageous. It's okay if you don't feel like you know enough because I know everything. It's okay if you're not sure how someone will respond to this because I actually know them and I know how they'll respond. And it's like being set a test where you've got the person who wrote the question sitting next to you, giving you the answers. So how we feel doesn't really matter anymore. It's okay if we don't feel up to it. It's okay if we don't feel like faithful enough or that we know enough to share like who Jesus is with our friends, because Jesus promises us that he is with us by our side, telling us the answers. The thing is that we actually know what happened to those followers from this story. We know what happened to them because it's human history, right? This wasn't made up. We can actually track the records of what happened after this moment. And each of those people who doubted in the face of the resurrected Jesus, confronted with the fact that he actually wasn't just a normal man, he can come back to life, what even is happening right now, those people who doubted even in that moment, they went out and did what Jesus told them to. They told some people about him. In fact, it went beyond that. They changed the whole landscape of human history because they went out and they just started talking a bit about Jesus. Obviously, we've got 2,000 years of knock-on effect to judge their actions by, which we won't see in our lives. But they did go out and do it, even though in the moment they're like, there's absolutely no way. There's absolutely no way. They actually went and did it. And the same is true of us. What Jesus asks us to do is to step out and be bold and represent him really well in our schools and in our families and in our homes. And we can have the same effect that they had. So, that command, which is for us, go and make disciples, go and tell people about me, go and represent me well in your classrooms and with your friends and in your families. I wonder how you feel about it. Maybe have a think now. How do you feel about God saying to you, it's your job to go tell some people about me and who I am? Maybe even, let's take a step down, because that might feel quite hard. How would you feel about inviting a friend to youth? We can even take it a step lower than that. How would you feel about just asking one of your mates, what do you believe? The truth is that, again, it doesn't really matter how you feel. Scared, confident, excited, worried. Because Jesus says to us, I will be with you. I know the answers. I know how to say it. I know how to bring it up. And he says, go. Give it a try. Jesus, the Son of God, there at the start of creation, here with us now, calls us friend, says, do you know what? I back you. You've got this. Go. Tell someone about me. Ask them a question. Invite them to youth. It's okay if you're scared. It's okay if you don't think you know the answers. The invitation is to be a disciple maker with me. I'm not sending you out to go do it for me. Be a disciple maker with me. So the question that I'm left with after all of that is just to think, well, who do I know who needs to know Jesus? Maybe just have a think about it now. Who in your life do you know who could really do with having the Albert Einstein of life next to them, feeding them the answers to the exams? Not literally, of course, metaphorically. Who do you know who's actually, they need to know Jesus? They need a voice of confidence and boldness and bravery and identity in their life. Could be a parent, could be a friend, could be a neighbor. Who do you know who needs to know Jesus? And then let me encourage you. You can do it. You can chat to them. You can invite them in. You could represent Jesus to them. And that's not just me saying that. That's Jesus saying it. He says, you are good enough. I've chosen you for a reason. So I don't want you to forget that name maybe that you're thinking about, that neighbor, that friend, that family member. Keep hold of that. And I'm just going to pray now. And then I guess for us, the big challenge is this week or in the next couple of weeks, what does it look like for us to live out that challenge and live that balance out of feeling not good enough, but letting Jesus do his part and to go anyway? Let me pray. Jesus, I thank you for who you are. I thank you for everything you've done. Thank you that we get to know you. And Jesus, I pray if anyone here doesn't feel like they do know you yet, even a little bit, doesn't need to be the ins and outs of your entire personality, but if anyone here hasn't met you yet and they want to, Jesus, I just pray that you draw near to them now, that they can just feel your peace, that there's just some kind of difference, even if it's in our thoughts or our feelings or the atmosphere around them, God, I pray that you draw near. And God, for each of us here, I pray that as we leave today, that you would go with us. I pray, God, that when we're in those tough moments in the week, when we're chatting to our mates, or when we feel like, actually, I could ask someone a question here, or when we have an opportunity to live like you that's a bit different to the way that other people are living, and it feels pressured, Jesus, I pray for all of us that we can feel your closeness then as well, and that we'll hear your voice, and we'll know what to say, and we'll have that little bit of courage that comes from you that will allow us to step forward, God. And I pray for each of our friends and our families and our neighbours, God, that each of us are thinking about now. I pray, God, that you show us how we can go and we can make them disciples, how we can show you to them. In your name, amen.